All right. So we're gonna look at some of the tools here that you use for printmaking and engraving. So can you explain some of the ones that we got here?
Right, so the main engraving tool is the burin or graver. The bent version is actually a modern version, like 1800s, 1900s. They're actually normally straight. I haven't been able to really find a good replica or even an actual vintage one like on eBay or anything yet. But this is the tool that I use most often. It's got a square cross section and it's got a very sharp point. You sharpen the face and you sharpen the bottom edges, and you hold it in your hand in a rather uncomfortable position, but this is what you have to learn how to hold it.
Right.
To remove some lines, you use this tool called a scraper.
Okay.
It's got 3 edges, and you can scrape out your lines, but you have to scrape it down to bare metal.
Okay.
But in that process, you add lines into the plate, and all those lines will hold ink, so then you use a burnisher to then polish out the plate. You can also use this to make corrections as well.
Oh, all right.
You can use both of these tools in a related process called mezzotint, which is created in the 1600s by the Dutch, and it becomes fairly popular for replicating paintings that early museums, or what we would call museums and art galleries, would have. You can buy a print. There's some very famous portraits done in mezzotint as well, and that's where you're working from the plate where the entire plate is cut with a sawtooth blade, so the entire thing will print black. And you use the engraver, the scraper, and the burnisher to polish it back out to bring out the light areas, the white areas. So those are the primary tools of your engraving. I also have some other items. We got a feather quill pen cut from a feather, and 2 ink cases, or penners as they're called. So this is a model from the 1600s. I'm not entirely sure exactly what year. This is a replica of one of those.
Okay. So what's the other part of it now?
So you got like a tube to hold your quills and then the other tools, and you got a little ink pot.
Okay,
and
so it'd be like almost like a traveling.
Yeah, it's a traveling ink case.
Yeah.
And allegedly you're supposed to be able to slide it in there and have it stand, but I don't trust it to do that.
Yes.
So. But we do see, even in the Middle Ages, we see illustrations of, we have the ink pot on one end and the pen case on the other, and they'll hang them from the lectern, from a loop or something like that, or they'll be strung on their belt.
Right.
But in this case, you just have this little train to hold a little cover, and you can put that in your pocket.
Yeah.
This is the 18th century version.
Okay.
So this is, the feather quills and a little ink pot. Both of those are made by Goose Bay Workshops in Delaware. I also have a little quill cutter. And this is actually curved on the blade side rather than a straight blade.
Okay.
And that was supposedly to make it easier to cut a quill, because of course it's cylindrical. Doing it with a straight blade can be a little problematic, but it does the same thing. And then I'll have sometimes known as a porte crayon, or a chalk holder, and this is just a kind of like an early mechanical pencil.
Okay.
It's a little slider there, pinches these little pinchers closed, and that's what holds the chalk or charcoal in the little holder there. And I got a little red one as well. So.
Oh, all right. Well, that's
and it's the same thing. You can tuck that in your pocket and take your writing implement with you.
Yeah.
And these date back to the 1400s.
Oh wow.
This particular style is allegedly 18th century. From what they're copying from. So yeah, those are the basic tools.
That's pretty cool. Now, how much? I mean, you're wearing an apron, obviously, to cover any of the ink issues and stuff like that you might have. Obviously.
This is more of like a modern apron.
Right.
They have some ones they have where they pin. There's like a triangular one that pins on your doublet, sort of thing. But from some of the visual print, there's a print of a print shop, an engraving shop. Of a printing shop from the 1630s, and they're wearing, I'm wearing 1630s outfit today, and it looks like he's got an apron kind of like this, where it's got a loop or a yoke rather than pinned to his doublet. Right. It's kind of like for me, it's kind of a moot point.
Right.
But yeah, you wear the apron to keep the ink off, and you can also use the apron to wipe plates if you need to.
Right.
kind of a typical thing.
So it was probably a pretty messy
Yeah.
experience. I mean,
Yeah, you can end up with ink all on your hands. And it
Yeah.
actually says in some of the instructions, make sure you have a spare rag to wipe your hands
Yeah.
before you handle other stuff, because you can end up with thumbprints all over your paper like really quickly.
Yeah. Now, I know you showed us the printing of that note paper. Like for a book, we're talking maybe 30 pages in a book. How long would that take to?
Oh, that's a good question. I have no idea how long it
Yeah.
would take to do a book. But that's done with letterpress. So you have to
letterpress.
use movable type. You have
Right.
to assemble the lines. At the printing office of Intaglio in Boston, we have the Declaration of Independence broadside, and there's about 9,000 characters and material in that, all individual pieces. We think it took them about 6 to 8 hours to set that up and type.
Okay.
To set up a book, you're probably taking a couple of months.
Right.
Because you have to do multiple pages, and you don't have page 1 and 2. You have to do like page 4, 3, 8, 5, 6. There's a whole algorithm that they created you're doing multiple pages on a broad sheet, and you're printing also on the inside. So you're doing a two-sided printing, and the way you fold up the paper into what are called gathers or signatures, you then bind that together in the book. And if you do everything properly, when you cut the pages open at the bindery, everything will be in sequential order. How that all works out, I'm not a book printer, so I have no idea. But there are books from the time period, both from the 1600s and the 1700s, that instruct you on how to do that, including how to set up your pages for a book.
Yeah.
So they were figuring that all the way back to Gutenberg. He was really the one that really started to figure that out right from the beginning, in the 1440s.
Yeah.
But the illustrations for some of the books are done on copper plate, and they've been printed. They're usually printed while the book is being printed, and then bound in with the book later on. Some of the books, especially in the 1500s and early 1600s, you would have like text and text with a window in the middle that you would then have to have an engraving plate put in there, and you have to eyeball it. So if you do get a chance to see actual prints from the 15 and 1600s, prop a little bit, the Museum of Printing in Haverhill, Mass. They have a collection of prints that I've actually been looking through and researching for them.
Yeah.
They've got prints from the 1500s, and you can actually see the plate a little skew, and you'll see smudge marks around the plate edges pressed into the paper with the letterpress, which is kind of interesting. So they were trying to do that.
That's cool.
Then by the 1700s, it seems they decided to do them separately. So you have just letterpress, and then you have just engraving, and usually the engraved plates, called plates, which is where we get the term today, are usually bound in the middle of the book.
Okay.
So if you remember books growing up, you have like an encyclopedia. It says go to plate A.
Yeah.
You go to the middle of the book and slightly different paper, and they're like specially set, special set, or like black and white photos. That all comes out of the very late 1600s into the 1700s.
Yeah. Now the plates were always copper?
Yes.
Or was there anything else prior to that?
Well, Daniel Hopfer in Germany in the 15 teens, he's an armor etcher.
Okay.
And etching was used specifically where you use acid to cut the lines into the plate or bite the plate. He experiments with steel plates in the 15 teens, but it appears to not have been very popular.
Okay.
Some people argue that was because the plates will rust very easily, because you're working with damp paper and steel plates, and it can be kind of a problem. Allegedly, Albrecht Dürer, the German printmaker from Nuremberg, he's like my print hero. I think he did try some etchings on steel plate, but he didn't like the process, so he went back to copper plate engraving. This is like 15 teens, 1520s. Then fast forward to the early 1600s, they start experimenting with the mordants, the acids, using things like ferrochloride, and they're using copper plate instead. So with etching, you have to coat the plate in acid-resistant varnish, scratch your lines into the plate, into the wax or into the varnish, and then immerse the plate in acid, and the acid cuts the lines for you. And some of the illustrations, you actually have your apprentice, like a little kid, with a tray with the plate on it with pitchers of acid pouring it out the open, which is so totally safe. but that's what they did. Whereas with more modern versions, you have an open tray where you'd immerse the plate, the acid in there, or you have a drop tray where you can suspend it. But back in the 1600s, they were looking at using copper plate for etching instead of steel plates, and it became very popular. Rembrandt is probably one of the best known etchers in the 1600s, and but here in the colonies, it's not used. We have copper plate engraving like Revere, Amos Doolittle, John Mulliken, a couple of Nathaniel Hurd in Boston in the 1690s. And Jeremiah Drummer, he does some of the first paper money in the colonies, and he does copper plate engraving. But he's a silversmith originally, his training. You're using the same tools, except you're just converting it to copper plate and printing off of that plate. So yeah, we see that technique develop in Europe around the 1450s, we think, and then it's always used. But etching kind of comes into its own by the 1630s. But like I said, it's not used in the colonies, not until after independence. Some of the prints that are done for New England for New England publication are printed in Europe, but then the books are shipped back to North America, as best as I understand it. But as far as I know, there's no etching specifically done until after independence. We think part of the reason is if you got a giant barrel of acid on a ship, because everything else, of course, has to be imported into the colonies, is doing this on a ship for 2 months, that may not be a great idea. What we also think is just easier to go to somebody like Revere or another goldsmith or a silversmith who's got the same tools and skill set. He just has to do everything backwards on the plate. Your choices are that, or spend 4 months on a ship, back and forth, something like that. It's extent to my knowledge.
Yeah. Now, you do work at Eads and Gill in Boston. That's open now to the public?
Yes. Well, we're obviously in winter hours. It's Thursday through Saturday, 10 to 4, and then if I remember right, Sundays are 12:30 to 4, and that's through December. And then I think in January, it's just going to be weekends and special private things. I don't quite remember, but you'll have to just check the website and give them a ring to see what they're doing for hours.
So people can look it up on their website.
Yep. And I've been there during the midweek since April, so I'm there Thursdays now. The week after Christmas, I'm going to be there all week, Tuesday through Thursday, and then after that, I think we're done for the season. But
but they can see, folks can get to see what you're doing here.
Yes, yeah,
and then they can also see the traditional letterpress as well.
They see it on the wooden press that we have, and we have the traditional letterpress.
Yeah.
And I'm usually printing this guy, which is a plate showing the two printing presses.
Both presses,
and it's inspired by a Paul Revere trade card, and it's kind of intended. I use it for like a business card.
Yeah.
I also do the Boston Massacre plate. So I have a replica I did for the 250th anniversary, and I also hand color them. Sometimes I'll print those at the shop. And I'm currently working on a map of Boston from a English London gentleman's magazine.
Nice.
So I'm printing these at the shop. I got the plate there now, so I just had to bring in the paper and print them on site.
That's cool. That's really neat. And then folks can buy stuff there.
Yep. So we sell what we print. We've got the letterpress we have the Declaration of Independence. We've got both the Boston version and the Mary Catherine Goddard version from Baltimore. She includes all the signers of the document, so it's quite a large portrait. We also have the Federal Convention, which is the draft of the U.S. Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. And I think we have maybe like a handful of other prints every now and then that become available because we run out of stock pretty quickly, which is great.
Yeah, exactly.
And we also have a bunch of other gifts and things, 18th century theme and things like that.
Yeah.
Both at the shop and the space next door is called Heritage Gifts. So they're all locally sourced, locally made crafts, and there's some candies, chocolates, clothing, quilts, trinkets, all sorts of stuff. Some of them have like a Boston theme. Some of them are just made locally.
Yeah.
All sorts of stuff like that.
Okay. sounds like a place to go to get a little bit of everything.
Definitely
right?
come and you have that, and you've got the North Church. So you got
Yeah.
the tours from that. You got the world famous Christ Church. You got I think their crypt tours have ended for the year though, because they're doing renovations on that. So that will be pretty cool, because they're going to have their 300th anniversary next year. I think that's when the church is founded. So that's going to be pretty exciting. And we got the printing office, and we've got the heritage gifts, and of course you got the North End. So there's lots to do there in Boston.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you very much, Andy, for doing this at Lafayette-Durfee House here in Fall River. So appreciate your time, and it's great. And if you're interested in it, I guess you go up to Eads and Gill, and do you have a website or Facebook page that you?
Just my name, andyvolpe.com.
Okay.
I'm also on the Instagram and on the Facebook.
Okay.
I also do some stuff every now and then at the Museum of Printing in Haverhill, Massachusetts, which is also a great place to visit. And I also am developing my portable printing press version of this Paul Revere stuff for schools and libraries. So since we have the 250th anniversary cycle, I'm trying to work with that and talking about the printing and how it affects the Revolutionary War. And we can't have the Revolution without people like Revere or Eads and Gill printing, and Isaiah Thomas printing stuff.
Right. Yep. I mean, it's awesome. All right. Thank you very much.
All right.